Law Chat New York with your host Philip Skittone, attorney at law, and co-host Patrick Garcia, attorney at law. And now, Law Chat New York.
Hello, and welcome to Law Chat New York, a program dedicated to explaining our legal system, legal issues that affect our lives. My name is Philip Skittone. This is my co-host, Patrick Garcia. We have both been practicing law over 25 years. Mr. Garcia is a retired support magistrate. Good evening, Patrick.
Good evening, Phil.
Our subject tonight is adoption. Approximately 135,000 children are adopted each year in the United States, about half of those from foster care. Giving a loving home to a child who needs permanent care is so very important. Wouldn't you say, Patrick?
I agree, Phil. I'm hoping we can encourage people to explore that as an option.
I'd like to introduce our guests. To my left, Arlene F. McCrea is a family lawyer practicing in Brooklyn and a graduate of CUNY Law School. And she is an experienced assigned attorney for the child. Ralph J. Porzio, to my right. He was a New York City family court judge for over 10 years. He is a former Richmond County Assistant District Attorney, approximately 7 years. Currently, Ralph Porzio is a professor of legal studies at the College of Staten Island, where I graduated, and he has been an attorney approximately 30 years. It is an honor to welcome you both to Law Chat New York. Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ralph, I would like to start by asking you, what is the responsibility of a family court judge where you serve so honorably in doing what I consider the most happiest type of case that we have in the family court, which is adoption?
Well, the objective with just about every case that you deal with in family law and in family court is to do what's in the best interests of a child or best interests of children. The law, which the laws evolved to the Adoption and Safe Families Act and those foster care situations that you talked about, where amazingly there's 65,000 per year. It's just an incredible number. And the objective with those cases is to achieve permanency, to have children. First option typically is have the children return home, but if the home is not suitable and if it's not in the best interest of the children, then adoption becomes one of the beautiful ways of resolving a case. It isn't always that way, but it's one of the most beautiful ways to deal with it. The interesting story I have, and I tell people, and they talk about what a happy day it is to do adoptions, and I remember this almost as if it was yesterday. And Phil, it was when you were practicing like you are now in Kings County Family Court, but in one of the older buildings there. And they used to do the adoptions in the library that the judges had. I remember it was a huge table and everybody was celebrating and there were balloons and the young lady who was being adopted had a beautiful dress. And I said, this is just such a happy day. But there was a woman, about 25 years old, sitting in a chair and she looked so despondent. And I went over to her, I sat down with her and I said, this is a happy day. You should be thrilled about this, to have one of your family members being adopted. And she said, well, I have to put it in perspective for you. Do you know how I'm related to this case? I said, no. She said, I'm the mother. I said, oh my. And then I realized that so many of those children are adopted by family members, but we should never lose sight of the fact that sometimes there's a backstory that is also very powerful. And that's why we have laws to protect parents as well. But we do realize how important adoptions are and how vital it is for these children.
Ralph, it's usually a last resort, not a first resort, but where it's necessary.
Exactly.
And Arlene, children come into foster care either sometimes voluntarily and are sometimes surrendered voluntarily or involuntarily if the parent has proven unfit. Is that true?
That is true.
And also, Ralph mentioned the Adoption and Safe Families Act. That's so the children don't languish in foster care for years, sometimes in the past, sometimes decades. Isn't that correct?
Right. I mean, there have been children who have, as they say, have been caught up in the foster care system
Right.
throughout, their whole childhood, and it can have adverse effects on the children because they can believe that no one wants them. If they're, because a lot of children know that people are just a foster parent for a paycheck maybe, or they're not permanent.
In other words, Patrick, every child deserves to grow up in a family environment in an atmosphere of love, safety, happiness, and understanding.
Well, that certainly is the goal, and we hope we achieve it. I had a question, though, for Ralph, though, about when the goal is permanency for the child, and you say there's always a downside, meaning there's a parent that's losing out. But are there any circumstances Ralph, under which a child who is adopted would be able to see or never be able to see the biological parent ever again?
That's a very interesting point. And what we have sometimes are what's called open adoptions, where the parent who would give up their parental rights would still have the ability to have visitation. It's not really parenting because they've given up their parental rights, but allowed to have visitation, and they have the ability to go to court and file a lawsuit where they could seek visitation. But again, the standard is what's in the best interest of the child. It is an option where parents say, you know what, I can't really be a parent right now, and for the foreseeable future I can't, but I still want to maintain contact with my child or children.
Ralph, when a foster parent adopts a child, they have the same legal rights that a parent would give, a birth parent or a biological parent, correct?
Absolutely.
And we now have, Arlene, some alternatives which we didn't have in the past in New York, where there can be kin guardianship. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And in what kind of a case would you want to use, I know there are certain criteria for that, but in what kind of a case would you like to see kin gap instead of adoption?
Well, I would actually talk to Ralph about that, but I think that, and you can, chime in, Ralph. I would think where family members are very involved with the child, because I think that it is important for children to not lose contact with their family. And I would ask you, Ralph, have you ever experienced a case where maybe the mother wasn't the appropriate, actually didn't want to lose contact with the child, and other family members wanted to be very involved? And did you ever have a situation where there were family members that you worked hard to make sure that the child stayed in the family?
Sure, and those kind of cases are very interesting. If it's a very tight-knit family, for example, the family might say, you know what, we really don't want to take away the rights of this loved one we have, the mother or the father or both of this child. So we'll step in and we'll get guardianship. That becomes a very nice option. Another way is this. If a child is 14 or older, you need their consent to be adopted. Right, yeah. And sometimes those children say, I don't want to be adopted. So the advantage of having a guardianship, it gives the child permanency, stability, a loving home, and then you still have the parents involved.
The parents keep their parental rights.
Right.
And usually visit the child and are around and helping with the child. But in other words, I've seen you not be judgmental, even though you were the judge, and try to help a family, maybe save people's lives even, which I think is fantastic. And let's go with, we spoke about which population of children would be adopted, basically children in foster care. There are also overseas children, but we're not going to really get into that today too much. But who can adopt? Do you have to have any particular, do you have to be, for example, a married couple in order to adopt?
No, you don't. You don't have to be a married couple. I mean, times have changed, so much now. Anyone who, not just anyone, but you can't be a felon. I don't think you can be.
Ralph, we're very careful who we permit to have the awesome responsibility of adopting a child. There's a tremendous background check.
Oh yeah, there's a screening process, and we also know that children are not just parachuted into a home. There are parents who unfortunately lose their rights and children go into foster care, or parent tragically passes away. There are parents who
That happens.
of course, want to be involved. But then you have foster parents. And foster parents go through a very, very rigorous screening process to make sure that the children are safe in that home. And there are some people that say, I'll be a foster parent, but I don't want to be an adoptive foster parent. I want to be there when children go into care. I don't mind that children come in and out of my household. I want to deal with children that really need help right away. And then there are people who are, in essence, it's a pre-adoptive home where they say, you know what, I want to be a resource. If for some reason the parents aren't able to have the children returned to them, please consider me. And then the children get used to that situation.
Right,
and they have a
right.
say. They have attorneys. And we're all attorneys, and we've all represented children. We've all been blessed to be attorneys for children, and how that role has evolved. And those children have an attorney, and they have a voice.
We haven't all had the difficult responsibility of being the judge on that case, so you have.
But they're all massive responsibilities. And I think it's as important, if not more important, to be an attorney for children and advocate for them like we do, and like what you guys do in Brooklyn, and the very difficult cases that you have to deal with.
Patrick, one thing we don't want to do, when I say we, this foster care system, the system of trying to protect children and achieve permanency, we don't want to return a child to a parent and then have that parent fail and the child have to go back into care, maybe to a different home, not to the home they're bonded to.
Well, we don't, but unfortunately, I think that does happen. It does happen. It happens even when you have a pre-adoptive resource. The pre-adoptive resource fails, or even an adoption fails. It does happen. We hope it keep that process to a minimum and those numbers to a minimum, but unfortunately, it does happen.
That's why we're guided by the best interests of the child, right?
Correct.
The legal process of adopting a child means, first of all, the first application to the finalization. It can take 6 months from the time you apply to the time you receive a child. The child is not just parachuted into the home. And we first have to have numerous background checks. You work with a caseworker, and they look at the associations of the person, make sure that it's a healthy environment that a child can live in. And then we have the child see how they adjust to that home. And sometimes there have been failed adoptions. Statistics show approximately 10% of adoptions fail, which means the child has to be rehomed, or the child has to be, the adoptive parent can't continue living with that child. And that's sad, that's tragic. And we try not to have that happen by studying things before we take that step, which is irrevocable, right?
Yeah, well, that's why judges have staffs. I know the judges in Staten Island work very, very hard. Their attorneys work for them. They also have to deal with probation officers who will do investigations, maybe children's services. Right. And it's very thorough, because judges realize, again, we're very fortunate in Staten Island to have very good judges who do these cases, to take that very difficult responsibility and are very careful in what they do.
Ralph, explain to us what is meant by the term freed for adoption. What does that mean?
Well, it means that the children are eligible to be adopted. And we use it in terminology oftentimes where parents have their rights terminated. In other words, they're given an opportunity to have the children returned to them, and they're given a plan. Typically, it's done by Children's Services, presents a plan to a judge, and then a judge will issue an order saying, if you want your children returned, this is what you need to do. And if they fail to do that, and the child is in care, in foster care for 15 out of 22 months, then unless there's some extraordinary circumstances, there's these issues that explain why there are problems, then the foster care agency has to file a termination of parental rights petition. Attorneys represent the parents. They get full due process. And if their rights are terminated, the judge finds that by clear and convincing evidence, their rights should be terminated. And clear and convincing evidence, it's in the best interest of the children to be adopted. The children are then freed. Freed means they're eligible to be adopted. Children are then in the care of the foster care agency, and hopefully then a foster parent, usually the pre-adoptive foster parent, will then step forward and file a petition for adoption, and then that could be finalized. It's a long process.
Arlene, how often does the court review permanency plan to make sure everything that's supposed to be done for a child is being done, that the home is a healthy and good environment for the child, that the child's receiving all the services a child needs, and everything else pertaining to the care and best interests of that child in foster care. How often is that reviewed?
Well, my experience when I was dealing with those kinds of cases in family court, I know that the judges tried to put them up for review like every 90 days, you know, sometimes sooner if there was an issue. Sometimes they would let it go a little longer, depending on what services were needed, what the issues were of the families. I had a question for Ralph, though, with respect to prospective people that wanted to adopt, because there are a lot of single people now that want to adopt, and sometimes they are discouraged. What advice would you give them, and where would you tell them to turn to engage in the adoption process?
Well, first they would have to go to a foster care agency
Right.
to go through training.
Right.
And that's very rigorous, it's very responsible that they have to do. And then they might start out with being foster parents for children on an emergency basis to see if there's something that they really want to be involved in. And then ultimately, they could be considered pre-adoptive parents, where there's more of a permanency. And there's a lot of responsibility for foster parents too, because remember their situation. They'll fall in love with the child.
Right.
And then you have a situation where maybe that child is going to be reunited and go back home.
It's a very difficult thing.
You bet. So they have to
emotionally.
be made aware that you might not even adopt this child that you love, that's been living with you for a while. This child might return home. So you have to really understand what you're getting into if you want to go that route.
So you're saying that the relationship between the adoptive resource or the foster parent and the agency is not quite, is more of a contractual relationship as opposed to a parental-child relationship then?
Exactly, sure.
If anyone
and it
is-
could be very disappointing at
Yes.
times.
Right. If anyone is interested in adopting a child, they could contact the Administration for Children's Services in New York. The phone number is 212-676-WISH, W-I-S-H. Also, they could call their local foster care agency. They can choose an agency. And for a list of agencies and other information, you can call the New York State Adoption Services at 1-800-345-KIDS.
We're fortunate in Staten Island. There's a number of agencies that are foster care agencies that do a very, very good job.
Yeah, and every 6 months there's a review, which could be 90 days, it could be 1 day if the judge believes it's necessary to assure that the child is getting all the services, that the child is safe, that the child is happy in that home. And we also listen to a child, don't we?
Yes, we definitely listen to children. We have to protect what's in their best interest, and you know, we hear from them through their attorneys, and we definitely need to understand what they want, what they desire, because there could be problems.
Maybe getting bullied by another child that's in the home, or there's something going on the caseworker isn't aware of that is a bad situation. So I just want anyone watching this to know that we are extremely careful, because in the past things were not done this carefully. Sometimes we're much more enlightened now at this juncture. Now,
Does that mean that your marital status affects the process then?
well, in other words, before you even could be a candidate to get into foster care, you have to go through an orientation, be certified, and they will check you in the statewide register and make a full background check, criminal, abuse and neglect, domestic violence, to find out the history. And we don't say this to discourage anyone who loves a child and would like to have a child, but not just anyone can adopt, and there is a process which is painstaking, and that's because we want to make sure that the child is well and safe. Now, usually after, let's say that you've had the home study where they look at, for example, the health and age of the adoptive parent, we expect that child now to stay with that adoptive parent until they grow up. And usually they'll have a relationship even after they grow up, even after years later, because that is emotionally the parent of that child. And Ralph, would you say that nurture is more important than nature, so to speak? Something we say sometimes.
There's nothing better than feeling loved. If you asked anybody, what are you looking to achieve? What makes you feel good? Someone loves me. My parents love me. They care about me. They're going to protect me. And that's what you want to achieve for the child. And remember what they've gone through if they've been through foster care. They've been through very difficult circumstances. Now, the odd thing is, in my 10 years of doing adoptions as a judge, almost every time you would ask a child, what I used to have was a genie bottle. And I would say to the children, I'm going to give you a wish, but the wish has to be about your family. Almost every case, the child would say, I want to be back with my parents. That's the difficult part. And what we have to balance as attorneys, what a judge has to deal with, that there's that difficulty there.
Right, right. And Arlene, certain children are considered hard to place. I hate that term, but children who, first of all, there is an actual criteria in the Office of Children and Family Services regarding age, time and care, special needs. And, you know, some of these children, it is heartbreaking. They have severe physical, mental, or emotional disabilities. And what kind of special help, for example, is there a special subsidy if someone is willing to open their heart and their home to a child who has those special needs and disabilities?
Yes, definitely. There are parents who actually have been trained, foster parents, and they also actually will get more extra funding if they take on special needs children or children that are hard to place. I hate that term also.
I know, I hate that.
Because it labels them, but some children.
But it's a valid point. I mean, you may have a child with severe handicaps that
Right.
require special medical training and special medication, right?
Right.
And,
Yes.
and I think that we all have stories about these wonderful foster parents who, very selflessly, they're not doing it for money. They're not doing it for any reason other than to help a child, and sometimes willing to take on a child with autism or retardation or something else, which is very difficult to deal with, but they want to do it, and it's amazing. It's remarkable and humbling.
And sometimes they take on multiple children.
Yeah.
Because one of the things we try to do is keep siblings
Right.
together.
Siblings together,
Right.
yeah.
So if you have 3 or 4 siblings that have special needs, that's an awesome responsibility for the foster parent. That's why we're truly blessed to have such dedicated people and dedicated agencies and very dedicated foster parents that want to make this happen.
We see on TV and in Hollywood, we see celebrities sometimes adopting children from around the globe, and that isn't really what we're discussing tonight, but that's important also. And there are many children from around the world adopted by Americans every year, and also some Americans adopted overseas. That's a new trend. And there are a number of organizations that know about this and can guide someone interested in something like that. Or you can contact the Bureau of Consular Affairs, United States Department of State, regarding such inter-country adoptions. Now, can you just adopt without having an attorney, or do you have to retain counsel?
It is always best to have an attorney. It's not the easiest process, not to discourage anyone, but it's better to have an attorney so you're not chasing your tail.
Well, first of all, rights attach after a child's been in the home. That foster parent can have a say-so as to what's going to happen, and just an attorney is almost a necessity, wouldn't you say?
Oh, I would agree, because if you were trying to remove, if you're an agency, you're a foster care agency or ACS, and removing a child from foster care and putting that child in another home, just as you said, Phil, they're entitled to a fair hearing to see if that is appropriate. We're not saying this just because we're attorneys that you need to have an attorney, but we realize that it's so important a process. Any process that you have where you have to deal with the courts, we have to deal with paperwork, you have to deal with legal issues, and in particular, remember, you're filing legal documents.
Right.
So typically, if you file legal documents, you need a lawyer that's going to at least explain them to you. However, we don't want to discourage anyone. We have a very good office of the pro se clerk here in Staten Island that will help guide people that can't afford counsel. But we also know that if it's a foster agency adoption, the foster agency usually will assist in trying to at least find counsel.
Right. And, you know, another thing which is the subject of many films and many discussions, when that adopted child grows up, they may wish to contact their parent. And there is a system in which if a parent does not wish to be known, they can be protected. They don't want to be contacted. But if they do, they can leave that they wish to be contacted. I wanted to also give an internet contact if you wish to have further adoption information, more detailed, and that would be the Office of Children and Family Services. That's ofsc.ny.gov/adopt. These are a couple of questions that we have from our clients. I want to adopt a child. Do I have to be married or own my own home in order to adopt?
Not at all. You don't have to be married or own your own home. You can rent, you can be single, as long as you are cleared and certified, if it's through the foster care system. But you can also have a private adoption where you're not using foster care, where you'd be able to be single and not a homeowner as long as you would qualify. And as long as, remember, there's going to be a petition filed in front of a judge, and the judge has to grant it. The judge has to determine that that's what's in the best interest of this child.
Another question regarding adoption. Is there an age limit of the adoptive parent in order to adopt?
It's a factor. If you look at it, if you have an infant child and an 85-year-old potentially adoptive parent, that might not be what's in the best interest of the child, because they look at statistics.
You'd have to have a backup.
But wouldn't you agree that if we didn't have grandmothers in this city, we would have a lot fewer adoptions?
But you have to have a backup.
That's a very good point.
You probably would have to have a backup.
Yes.
We're going to have to close it pretty soon. I'd just like to thank you all for being here. And you know, the passion that you show for this topic really matches my similar passion. And I'd like to thank you all for being here.
It was a pleasure.
And please don't be discouraged from this. We want and need a number of foster parents. I often say, you know, when someone is adopting a child, you know, we have several other children for you. Anyway, good evening, and justice for all. I want to make sure everyone has some of the contact information we gave out, and obviously this is in New York, but anyone watching this, I'm sure there are other local authorities that you could get in touch with, but in New York, call the Administration for Children's Services. The phone number is 212-676-WISH, W-I-S-H. They also can call really any local foster care agency for information if they're interested. Or in New York, we have an 800 number. It's 1-800-345-KIDS, K-I-D-S. And that would put you in touch with the New York State Adoption Services. And on the internet, go to ofsc.ny.gov/adopt. if you're interested and you wish to find out more about this very important topic, which really can change your life. Good luck.